You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is about community, and we welcome your participation at the station.
3CR is open to a wide diversity of volunteers and is a great way to connect with Melbourne's activist community.
Have you ever thought about volunteering, doing a reception shift, getting a program on air?
Training in radio skills or contributing to one of the station's committees.
There are many ways to be involved at 3CR.
To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au and get in touch.
Destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. Our commiserations, not that they're any mean much, but commiserations to all those people, all those listeners in Queensland and southern Queensland, northern New South Wales, who've been dealing with the after effects of Cyclone Alfred. What do you expect from the name Alfred? It's a difficult situation, but it's something we're going to have to get used to. Usually these type of things happen in non-populated areas, but obviously none of us believe in climate change, do you? It's all a conspiracy, isn't it? Let's move on. Do you know what anarchy is all about? An anarchist society is a voluntary, non-hierarchical society based on the creation of political and social structures based on two principles: equal access to power and wealth. Why those two principles? It's inequalities in power and wealth which give the Buffolinis of the world and the Muskies of the world the ability to determine the lives of billions of people. So if you want to sacrifice yourself and your children on the altar of God, King and country, now's the time to do it. All right, let's move on. Now, I assume the Israeli Prime Minister feels a little bit threatened these days, Mr. Netanyahu. The fact that a counterpart of his in the Philippines now finds himself in The Hague facing International Criminal Court. It's interesting that the Marcos regime in the Philippines, wanting to get rid of a potential opponent, they honoured the International Criminal Court arrest warrant, and the former president now finds himself in The Hague. And that's the important thing to remember. Now, if for some reason the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, found himself in Australia and we actually are part of the International Criminal Court, would we deport him? I doubt it. Now, those of you who think the Gaza carnage, and that's the word, it's not a war, it's carnage, has ended, think again. I think as I speak, this is the 10th day that the residents of Gaza who face eviction, courtesy of Buffolini, President of the United States of America, have endured a blockade of food, medicine, water, fuel by the Israeli authorities, who are attempting to change the parameters of the agreement which led to the current ceasefire in Gaza. Now, I think if the Chinese government was doing this anywhere on its territories, not that Gaza is a territory of Israel, it's a occupied nation, the fact is that we all would be jumping up and down. But it's as if Gaza's fallen off the cliff as far as Australia is concerned. And that brings me to this concept or the idea of empathy. I mean, talking here in the Anarchist World this week, it's like shedding a tear in an ocean of indifference. That's right, a tear in an ocean of indifference. Because we seem to have forgotten that we all belong to the human family. You know, the human family. I know it's hard to believe that it all belonged to the human family, that the people of Gaza and the West Bank and West Papua, you know, are somehow part of the human family, and the death and destruction which occurs in these areas of the world is somehow irrelevant. It's not happening to human beings. The fact that directly almost 60,000 Gazans have lost their lives in the carnage, and directly 2 million people have been held as hostages, and access to food and basic necessities and shelter is used as a bargaining chip, and the fact that the significant number, the majority, were basically non-combatants who died, women and children, and the fact that we don't seem to be able to shed a tear. Not that shedding a tear does much, but at least it makes us feel a little bit better, and it actually highlights our common humanity. Because the loss of life in West Papua of Gaza is just as painful for the families and friends of that family or that group than the loss of life in our own family. And that's the reality. Empathy has become a disposable commodity in the Western world in the 21st century. We shrug our shoulders, we move on. Oh, there's another football match. Oh, there's another play. There's another festival. There's another nice restaurant to eat at. I mean, that's the reality that we all face on a day-to-day basis. Now, empathy is the glue that holds us together. The fact that we can feel empathy for people outside our immediate circle, people outside our nation state, is fundamental to creating societies where violence no longer plays a significant part. So all I can say is a teardrop in an ocean of indifference may make no difference on the ground, but psychologically it highlights that we are all part of that human family. So because something doesn't appear on social media or is not part of the 24-hour news cycle doesn't mean it's not real. For example, the suffering in West Papua, which has been occurring for over almost 7 decades. The fact that we are still seeing the gross exploitations of West Papuans who don't live in Gaza 10,000 kilometres away, who live less than 75 kilometres from the Australian mainland, and the fact that they never seem to be part, of the discussion in this country because we don't want to offend our Indonesian neighbours, and the fact that the military presence has been increased since the election of a war criminal. Yes, it seems to be you need to be a war criminal these days, to get any traction in the world, as their president by an overwhelming majority. We seem to think that somehow nothing is happening in West Papua. Now, just in case you're not aware, I'm the convener for the West Papuan Rent Collective. And the West Papuan Rent Collective has been paying the rent in an office in Docklands for the West Papuan community to conduct their independence struggle in the way they see fit. And this office has been a thorn in the side of the Indonesian government and continues to be surveyed, be under constant pressure from the Indonesian authorities. And at least the Australian government currently has not gone about making the West Papuan independence movement a terrorist, in inverted commas, organisation, as they've done with Hezbollah in Lebanon and other freedom fighters in the Middle East. So the West Papuan office is there to help facilitate the West Papuan independence struggle, to give West Papuan activists in this country and around the world a mechanism of bringing their struggle to the attention of the Australian people. Now, this isn't happening in Gaza. It's not happening in the West Bank. It's not happening in Tibet. It's happening here in Melbourne. And every 4 months we have a gathering in order to remind people of the fact that it's ordinary Australians, that's right, people like you and me, people that are considered to be outliers, people who are marginalised, who put their hands in their pocket to raise the necessary funds to keep the West Papuan office open, and it's now been open for over a decade. And it does have an impact on the West Papuan independence struggle because it gives West Papuan activists the opportunity to present their case to the world. Now, I'm encouraging you to join the West Papuan Rent Collective. Without 90 people in the Rent Collective, the rent does not get paid. The rent doesn't get paid, people get evicted. And that will have a profound impact on the West Papuan independence struggle. Now, I'm inviting you, on behalf of the West Papuan Rent Collective, on behalf of the West Papuan office at 838 Collins Street in Docklands, to come along on Sunday the 30th, that's right, Sunday the 30th of March at 1 p.m. for lunch, a West Papuan lunch, then speakers, then an auction to raise money. It gives you a chance to have a look at the office, to meet some of the activists, to talk to people, and ultimately, if you like what you see, to become a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective. And membership is $1 a day. That's $365 a year. That keeps the office going. The whole purpose of the West Papuan Rent Collective is not to dictate policy or strategies to West Papuan activists. That's their business. Our business is to provide the space via which they can conduct that independence struggle without the constant threat of eviction. So if you can't come on the 30th and you want to join the West Papuan Rent Collective, give us a call on 0439 395 489 or look up the West Papuan office. But I think come along. 1 p.m. start, usually finishes by 4 p.m. at 838 Collins Street. Walk around the back to the kitchen area and join people and be part of this forgotten struggle. This is a decolonisation struggle. These are people who are consistently acting against the Indonesian occupation and in some regards continue to have armed resistance in West Papua, although the struggle is much wider than a struggle with armed resistance, a much wider struggle. But the important thing is it's Australian military which trains, it has trained and continues to train the Indonesian military in counter-insurgency, and these are the type of tactics that have been used in West Papua and continue to be used today. So come along, 1 p.m, 838 Collins Street, Sunday, the 30th of March. Let's move on to a little bit of local news. Mr. Dutton, the Prime Minister in waiting, has had a tough week. Now, the lad's been flooded in, and my commiserations, but he came out fighting. When the Australian Federal Police, Seige, New South Wales, legal authorities have finally said that most, if not all, of the anti-Semitic attacks, including the caravan laden with explosives, was not about active anti-Semite sentiment in this country. It was about criminal activity which was used to endanger fear in the community to promote their particular agenda. Now, Mr. Dutton has been caught flat-footed. He and the Liberal National Party like to think of themselves as security. They're the number one security people in this country. They're there to protect the Australian people from all these threats. Now, Mr. Dutton seen a political opportunity to help his, how shall I put it, help his ability to become Prime Minister of this country, was willing to exploit that fear. And we've spoken about that on this program year in and year out. Liberal National Party policy since the death of Menzies has been about creating division in our society, or in Australian society. It's about creating division. Remember the leaners and lifters policy of the Morrison government and the Howard government? Remember robo-debt? There's always the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander can to kick down the road. Can be very effective, as far as reinforcing people's prejudices in this country. Then you've got the Muslim can to kick down the road. You name it, they'll do anything to promote their divisive agenda. An extremely divisive agenda which pits Australian against Australian based on sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, and the list goes on and on. So Mr. Dutton came out fighting as you'd expect him, and he said it's a red herring. Mr. Albanese will retire soon, and the front bench in the Labor Party is, fronting up the media, being all hairy-chested to, promote their ambitions. What a load of crap. And the funny thing is that the Murdoch media, as we expect, and most of the legacy media, has lapped it up. Lapped it up, boys and girls. They love it. They love it. They've lapped it up, as they did when we needed a little bit of unity, when there were all those attacks which nobody really knew where they were coming from at that particular point in time. But Dutton and the Liberal National Party were willing to use that fear to divide this country. This man is not fit to be a Prime Minister, let alone fit to be a police officer, which he was in the past. What a joke, Mr. Dutton. What a joke. And talking about jokes, how about his little mate, Buffolini, the President of the USA, the President of the US of A, the buffoon. He's got the mannerisms of a Mussolini, you know. Unbelievable. Now, as I said a number of months ago when he was re-elected, it's the Americans' problem. But unfortunately, it also becomes our problem. Because irrespective of what you think of Mr. Turnbull, to see him take on the government-gelded Australian Broadcasting Corporation, you know, about their position regarding Buffolini and the US administration, you know, was spot on. Spot on. Now, what is Buffolini doing? Now, tariffs, I don't have an issue. Tariffs can be used to protect an economy. And if you look at the Australian history, since Federation, it's been a struggle between the free traders, in inverted commas, and those who wanted tariffs. And at different times in Australian history, you've had both tariffs or free trade, okay? But what's Buffolini and his cohorts trying to do? Because remember, Buffolini and the Republican Party won the election, the presidential election, Congress, the Senate, and have the Supreme Court in their pocket on the basis they were going to make America great again, all right? And that meant bashing everybody else. Now, those regular listeners to the Anarchist World this week know that over the last few years, I have been saying over and over again, for us to tie ourselves to Uncle Sam's coattails, to allow Australia to become a military base for US expansionism is a recipe for disaster. And people like me, and obviously it's not just an original thought, you know, nobody has an original thought. If you have one in your life, you're lucky, and I'm still looking for mine. But the thing is that other people are now beginning to take up the same drumbeat, you know. What advantage is it to us to be browbeaten by the US government, who the current government seems to be experts at browbeating their allies and supporting some, not all, of America's enemies? So what's happening in the United States of America? A lot of people seem to be a bit confused. Well, the thing is, Buffolini and his crowd do not represent the American people. The American people elected them on the basis they would introduce economic policies which would improve their situation. So Buffolini economic policies are nothing more than trickle-down economics. Not trickle-down, treacle-down. Now, over the last 45 to 50 years, we have seen around the world and in this country the impacts of a deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation agenda. And most of that money which has been generated has gone to a minuscule minority. Now, the policies that have been introduced in the United States of America are policies which are exactly the same as Liberal National Party policies. That's why we don't see Dutton say boo to Buffolini. Right? It's very simple. I mean, economics, they tell me, is complex, but it's very simple. You decrease taxes, right? Mainly for the rich, and that's what we've seen in the United States of America. Right? At the same time, what you do as you decrease taxes, you increase tariffs. increasing tariffs theoretically means that you have the ability to provide jobs for local people. But at the same time, what's been happening in the United States of America is the United States public service has been savagely hacked with a hatchet by Mr. Musk and his merry men and women. And what we've seen is those gains which were made during the century of revolution and struggle by so many Americans over so many decades disappearing overnight. So the ultimate losers, if you want to use that word, the ultimate economic losers are going to be the very people who thought that a billionaire would somehow resolve their problems. Because the policies which are being flouted now, where you decrease taxation, remove any safety net which has been established to protect people who find themselves in difficult situations, and raise manufacturing in that country without any trade union involvement, means that what we see is the reintroduction of 19th century economics, where most of the profits flow to a minuscule minority. And every indicator that you look at, whether it's here or in any other country, highlights that the ultimate winners in this particular struggle are not those people who've been excluded from the wealth through a deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, economic philosophy. So, as I said before, the American people elected the Republican Party into power. They elected Buffolini as president. It's their problem, but let's not make it our problem. Now, it's interesting to see that while the Australian authorities keep their heads down, and although tariffs have been introduced regarding steel and aluminium, which is only 0.1% of our exports to the US of A, not a boo. Not a boo. While in Canada, America's northern neighbour, people are fighting back. And the thing is, when you're dealing with a buffoon, you need to fight back. So what can we do? Well, personally, you can do something today. There are many US companies that you deal with on a day-to-day basis in this country. Many. You can boycott them. And you can let them know why you've boycotted them. This is what's happening in Canada. This is nothing radical. It's about survival. You can boycott their products. You can boycott their services. It's really not going to make your life a misery. It's a simple thing to do. If you use Amazon, you don't have to use Amazon. There's other mechanisms. If you go to some, food outlet that's based in the US of A, you don't have to go there. If you use some type of, social media outlet, it's based there that increases their profits, well, look at it. You do have options, and economic boycotts can be effective, although we're a small country. The important thing to remember is that as far as trade with the United States of America is concerned, it's not like with China, where they're, they're the winners. As far as the United States of America is concerned, they're the winners. We import more from them than they import from us. So how about a few duties, well-placed tariffs on United States products? Because when you deal with a man like Buffolini and an administration like the current Republican Party administration, unless you stand up to them, irrespective of the power they have, you will find yourself being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Now, I know Australians, we love sport, all right? We love sport. It's our, we like to think we punch above our weight when we go to the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games. And the mantra is gold, 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 gold. Now, you've just won a gold medal as a country. And it's a gold medal which it should be a medal of shame. And it's called Australia's gold medal. We have won the gold medal as far as Arse-Licking is concerned. Gold, gold, gold. We're going to keep our heads down. We're going to be good little boys and girls. We're going to let more US bases be established in this country. We're going to intertwine our defence system with their defence system. We're going to hope and pray that if things go a little bit bad in this, in our part of the world, that the Uncle Sam will come and help us out. Well, it's not going to happen. You may have a gold medal for arse-licking as a country, but the fact is that type of gold medal is totally useless. And it'd be nice to see, not just a former Prime Minister, proclaim the Emperor has no clothes, but it would be nice to see some of our politicians in government and in opposition get up and put forward ideas and policies which counter the USA agenda to make America great again. Isn't it time we made Australia great again? You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Tocano. Now, feigned outrage. I love it. See, the Murdoch media works on the principle of feigned outrage. There's always something to be outraged about. And if there isn't something to be outraged about, you can always manufacture it. And the great thing about feigned outrage is that it has political impact. Now, let's look at the crime situation in Victoria. Now, obviously, there's been an upsurge in home invasions, an upsurge in assaults, upsurge in carjacking in Melbourne and maybe a few other regional cities. Now, that's a reality. It's a total reality. But why do we find ourselves in this situation? And I thank Mr. Kennett over and over again when we find ourselves in this situation. We are at a very difficult juncture in Australian history. With the introduction of artificial intelligence, with the digital age, we've now reached the situation where not everybody is needed in the productive process. Now, when you live in a society where the wage system is the arbitrator of whether, that's right, whether you have a good life or not, and you have an increasing number of younger people who are totally excluded from the wage system because of the lack of opportunities, because of the economic direction we have moved in as a country in order to maximise profits for a minuscule 1%. The fact is that you will see a breakdown in social cohesion. Those of you who think that the social security system was established in order to provide for those people who find it difficult to find work or are sick or disabled or elderly, think again. A social security system has two functions. One, to provide that minimal support, but two, to maintain social cohesion and decrease violence in the community. Because everybody has access to the basic necessities, and young people have access to a future. Now, when the Kennett regime was installed, courtesy of the Victorian people in the 1990s, the fact is that a whole system of education, technical education, was brushed aside. And what happened is that children who may not have had an academic bent but were incorporated in the workforce through technical skills and apprenticeships became ostracised from the Australian system. Because it's much, much easier, isn't it, to import people who are fully qualified than actually train local people. And that's the dilemma. We have an increasing number of young people who have no future in this country. No future. No future is access to stable housing, no future to access to education, which will lead somewhere. And even if they get a degree, the fact is they begin life with a debt. What an extraordinary thing. You get an education and you start your working life with a debt, courtesy of the Hawke-Keating Labor government. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. And you wonder why there is increasing social dislocation and a breakdown of social cohesion and an increase in violence and an increase of a no future mentality in our society. So we are at a juncture, an important juncture in Australian society. Do we continue to create and share wealth through a wage system, or do we look at alternatives like a universal basic income and people working outside that private investment for private profit mantra, which is everything in our society? Look, who am I? Who am I? But when you limit or deny a significant section of the population the ability to create a reasonable future for themselves in order to maximise profits for the 1% that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, you will get a breakdown in social cohesion and increasing violence. And no amount of changing the laws will address that ultimate problem. Let's not forget that in the 18th century and the 19th century, mainly the 18th century, there were over 400 capital offences. That's right, over 400 capital offences, hanging offences in good old Mother England. Did that deter crime? No. The way to deter crime and not make it a method of earning your living is to actually provide those supports. And people like Dutton and Buffolini, who think introducing more laws, more police is somehow going to solve the issue, need to think again. And the only way they'll think again is if you say something about it. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. You like the word un-Australian? It's un-Australian. You're right? Un-Australian. Now, we've seen, and I know you may think this is a bit flippant, and I try not to be flippant on the Anarchist World this week. I'll leave that for other programs. But you may think that look, I've launched a little campaign. You know, it's just a little campaign. Most likely it won't go anywhere, but it's something to think about. Watching footy, the NFL variety, the Australian Football League, on Saturday afternoon on 3-to-air television, whether you like it or not, was a fundamental Australian pastime. You know, couldn't get to the footy, didn't have the money to go to the footy, loved your footy team, gave you some feeling of being part of society, you know, your little tribe maybe won the grand final. So Saturday afternoon football on 3-to-air television was sacrosanct. It was an Australian rite of passage. You may laugh at it, you may think it was funny, you may think it's irrelevant, but for a significant number of people in this country, it was a rite of passage. You watched the footy on the afternoon, had a few cans, shouted at the television sets, came around with your family, you know, waved your little flags. It was part of something that kind of made us part of a particular society, made us part of society. That's why it was Australian. Now, the AFL, the Australian Football League, in its drive to maximise profits, has, guess what, sold the rights to watching the footy on Saturday afternoon on free-to-air television away. That's right. You can flick on your TV, and unless you're willing to pay some private entity, most likely based in the US of A, unless you're willing to pay the fee, that family tradition of watching footy on Saturday arvo with your mates and kids is on free-to-air TV is no longer part of the Australian way of life. So we talk about people like you and me being un-Australian, all right? Well, I'm not an Australian. I was born in this bloody country, all right? I was born here. I'm an Australian. I've got a passport. It says I'm an Australian. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a Martian. Who knows? So, I know it hurts me, but boycott the AFL. But don't just do it silently. Email them. Don't telephone them. It's a waste of time. Or even write to them and say, Dear AFL, dear CEO, whatever his name is, I've forgotten. All right? I think the AFL is un-Australian because you have now denied a rite of passage to generations of Australian children and family, the ability to watch the AFL footy on Saturday afternoon on free-to-air TV. And for 2025, I will be boycotting the AFL. Now, they think you're too stupid to fight back. And that's why they've done the unthinkable. So fight back. As I said before, boycotts do have impacts because these people rely on you, whether it's your eye on paid TV, free-to-air TV, buying tickets, in order to survive and prosper. So remove your participation. End of story. Let's move on. This is the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Now, censorship. You realise you don't have freedom of speech in this country. You may think you do. Now, there is a federal election coming up, and the High Court in its wisdom found there was an implied right to freedom of speech because you couldn't have an election without freedom of speech. So during the election campaign period, we have an implied right to freedom of speech. But outside that, there is no implied right, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, there is, but it takes a bit of effort. Now, I don't know if you've noticed that the last year to 15 months since the Gaza carnage began, that artists and arts boards have been under siege in this country Because, artists and arts boards, a little bit like the science community. We've seen less and less and less independence in these organisations. We've seen less government assistance for artists and arts boards across Australia, as we've seen, of scientific research. And that means that the artistic community and art boards, organisations like the Sydney Theatre Company, Australian Opera, the Australian Ballet, and the list goes on, and all the organisations are based around some of the major galleries in this country, have become increasingly reliant on private sponsorship. Now, that old saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune, is relevant as far as independent arts boards and artists are concerned in this country. And we've seen some totally disgusting things that have occurred in this country, in the artistic community, because rich people who get a tax deduction, that's right, a tax deduction by investing in arts boards and arts organisations across this country, removing their financial support because, heaven forbid, these organisations have given voice to Palestinians and their particular viewpoints. Literary festivals, Palestinian activists and writers banned. The Australian Biennale Festival in Venice, an exceptionally important artistic festival, Palestinian artists who had an opportunity to put forward their viewpoints, banned. Orchestra, Palestinian activists, banned. And if they're not banned, if that particular art board, that particular arts organisation has the courage to stand up, what happens is that particular benefactors remove their financial support. And because there is no government support or minimal government support for these organisations, those organisations have to curtail their activities. So when we have a society where censorship, as Mr Turnbull told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, is not just a matter of not being able to get your opinions across on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation or News Corporation or whatever other private media entity. The fact is that when we see that artistic boards and artists are about extending the envelopes, stretching the envelopes, getting us to look at things in a different way, not like me, talking to you and trying to get you to look at what you're doing and maybe changing things, but actually showing in a different way, in a different format, what society is about. And then when we see that artists are being censored, denied the ability to promote their ideas because of their, because maybe they're Palestinians and it's not the order of the day, then we've got a huge problem in this country. Think about it. And if you think I'm making this up, check it out. You've got the ability. Go on social media. Check it out. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Now, look, a few things. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489, especially if you want to join the West Papuan Rent Collective. A few websites, public interest before corporate interests, anarchistmedia.org, YouTube channels, public interest before corporate interests. The list goes on and on. It's all there. You can even send me letters. You can post them to Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Emails, info@pipsy.net, anarchistmedia.org, info@atticusmedia.org, and the list goes on and on. It's all there. It's up there on social media. Look, I think social media is overblown in many regards. As you and I know, we're the product. And the fact is that we've allowed these platforms now to be held in the hands of a minuscule minority who then use that power they have to determine public opinion, as we see with Mr. Muskie Boy, to promote their own agendas, which are based on, increasing their profits. You know that, I know that. So the fact is that ultimately change comes from people taking action. And that's what it comes from. You can like all you like. You can cry all you like. You can throw as many bricks at the TV as you like. You can throw your computer in the river. But ultimately action comes from taking... a bit of a tautology, boys and girls. Action comes from taking action. Change comes from taking action. Now, a number of people have asked me, how's the Tocano for Flinders campaign going? Is it gathering momentum? Well, unfortunately, this is a problem I find in Australian society. There's a lot of people who think that, somebody should do something about that, And when somebody puts up their head above the parapet to do something about that, they find that sometimes they're all alone. It's what I call the Eureka principle of revolution. A month before the Eureka Rebellion on the 11th of November 1854, 25,000 people, about 80% of the population of Ballarat, gathered at the monster meeting at Bakery Hill. On the Saturday before the Eureka Stockade was overrun, there were about 2,000 armed diggers, doing military manoeuvres. On the morning of the Eureka Rebellion at 4 a.m. on the 3rd of December, Sunday the 3rd of December 1854, there were about 104 diggers left in the stockade. And that seems to be the way things go in life today. A lot of people want change. A lot of people are unhappy with the particular situation, but they're more interested in fighting among themselves about the crumbs which are brushed off the corporate table. Now, the idea of standing in the federal election in a blue ribbon Liberal seat, which is Flinders, is very simple. It's about raising issues which will never be raised during an election campaign. And during election campaigns, people are forced, in many regards, to look at the issues and make certain decisions. Now, I'm trying to stand for Flinders, not because I'm going to be elected. I have a snowflake's chance in hell of being elected. You know that. I know that. I haven't got $1 million to waste on a campaign, all right? Because politics, especially federal politics, is an expensive business, a very expensive business. But I'm interested in raising ideas like a universal basic income, taxing the financial sector, the list goes on and on. Because we should be living in the land of milk and honey. We are not living in the land of milk and honey, but we should be living in the land of milk and honey because we've got the resources and the population base for this to occur. But every day we see advertisements on television and on radio and on social media for Australian people to donate money to private charities to send Australian kids to Australian public schools. Extraordinary situation we find ourselves in. So, if you live in the electorate of Flinders, or you know somebody who lives in the electorate of Flinders, which is part of the Mornington Peninsula, which covers suburbs like Mount Eliza, Mount Martha, Rye, Rosebud, Grip Point, Hastings, Pearsdale to some degree, and the list goes on, and you want to see a radical independent candidate on the list, give us a call, 0439 395 489, or send an email to info@pibci.net. This Sunday I'll be at the Mornington Peninsula, the big park there near the shopping centre, from 11 to 12 the sound enclosure in, in Rosebud, nearly forgot, between 12:30 and 1:30, and outside the post office at Hastings between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. But go to the websites, you'll find out all about it, and if you're interested in nominating me for the Flinders election, let me know. Thank you for listening to the Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. This program has been broadcast to you courtesy of the Community Radio Network on Community Radio 3CR. Listen in to the Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
We know you love listening to 3CR, but we also know that many of you haven't downloaded the Community Radio Plus app yet.
The app lets you tune in anywhere and share the station with your friends.
So, show the love and share the love and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.